and welcome back to another episode of Trumpet Talks with Steve Patrick. I'm, of course, sitting here with Steve Patrick, the owner and developer of Patrick Mouthpieces, and a Nashville-located studio trumpet player. Steve, how's it going?
It's going great, Kyle.
Good, good. Thanks again for sitting down with us. Today we're going to kind of target our discussion and our questions towards people who are professional trumpet players, who are kind of doing the same work that Steve does on a daily basis. If you're a kind of player who sort of brings home the bread with the trumpet in the hand, those sorts of things, this video is going to be specifically directed to you. So keep paying attention and keep watching. For those of you who maybe don't know Steve and the kind of professional work that he does, a bunch of what you do is actually studio recording. I mean, in addition to live work and stuff like that. Right. What sort of things have you played on professionally in the studio?
I hate it when people ask me this because I can never, I mean, you're so excited, especially when you're younger. You're like, oh, I played on such and such, and I had this opportunity. And, with cars and kids and wife and just everything that goes on in life, you start forgetting the things that you're like, I got to remember that I played on that. But it's I can never remember.
Well, I've done my research a little bit, and you guys can do your research too if you're curious. On Lessons with Studio Musicians, we'll put that in the link in the description. If you kind of scroll to his profile, all the way down to the page is like another link that you can click, and it brings you to this huge list of all the stuff that you've played on. So as a quick refresher for your memory, I've got you listed on, and these are just a few. Of some videos or some movies such as Toy Story 4, Hoodwinked, and Narnia. Remember playing any of that?
I actually do. When you say them, I totally can remember.
It comes back in those times. And then a huge thing that's happening in Nashville specifically is video game recording. That's like kind of a hot industry right now. And so you've played on a bunch of the Halos, on a bunch of the Call of Duties, a few of the Star Wars games as well. Once again, that's just kind of like a handful of kind of the bigger names, ones that you know. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff you played on. If you had to sort of gander a guess of all the things that you've played on, songs, albums, cues for TV, cues for movies, video games, how many Steve Patrick recordings have been made? How many things are you playing on?
My word. I mean, if you're talking actual songs and cues.
Yes.
It's probably 25,000 to 40,000.
Is that right?
At this point, yeah.
Wow.
It's a lot.
That is a lot. Yeah. So that's kind of your like a primary source of how you kind of make your life as a professional trumpet player. Yeah. Thinking back to kind of early days of trumpet playing for you and things like that, is this what you saw yourself doing as maybe a young trumpet player? We know that you wanted to play trumpet from a very young age, but kind of like growing up and then going to college and moving to Nashville, like was this it? Did you always see yourself in this position?
When I was young, I mean, my dream was just getting to play with Maynard. So wearing a Maynard T-shirt, being on the road with Maynard,
right?
And I had the opportunity to do that,
right.
And it was a short time, but it was incredible. And I remember just thinking that it was the most unbelievable thing that I'd been able to do in my life. But I also remember kind of at the end thinking, I'm way too ADD. I have too many interests for this to be the only thing that I do.
Sure.
Just tour with one act. And so at that point, it really came to the thing of like, I wanted to do sessions. And that was about the time that I was moving to Nashville a little bit later.
Okay.
Where it was like, I want to do diverse things because I love playing classical music. I love classical solo literature. I love playing with the symphony and sitting in that. The presence of musicians like that on stage is unbelievable. And then the live commercial work that I'm able to do or the commercial recording that I'm able to do, I love that. And that's probably what most people know me for. Right. But that's just a small portion, honestly.
Yeah. And so that kind of changed. Can you kind of describe how maybe the life of a professional trumpet player, or kind of how your life has sort of changed throughout your career? Like what used to kind of be the way that we were able to be a professional trumpet player versus what it is now? Is it different? Is it the same? Kind of like what you've learned over your career playing professionally in Nashville?
I would say that it's definitely changed from about the time that I went to school in the late 80s, early 90s to college, people were really still being, being thought of as, you're going to be a lead player. You're going to be a jazz player, jazz soloist kind of player. You're going to be a principal trumpet player in a symphony. You're going to be a section trumpet player in a symphony. Very pigeonholed, very focused.
Right.
And I honestly don't know how anybody can make a living like that anymore. It's kind of sad because you had a lot of different people that were working that had their thing that they really did well and like better than anybody else. And now it's, if you're not incredibly diverse, you can't work. Even in a symphony, you have so many pops jobs. Now, if you're the person that says, I'm going to sub out those services, that's great if you're in that position, but most people aren't. And, like I said before, it's like with family and kids and a house payment and car payment and computers and iPhones, and, you pretty much got to say yes to everything if you're going to play for a living. And so that means being incredibly diverse, which means switching mouthpieces, which means switching equipment. It means, when it's time to sound like this guy, you got to sound like that guy. When it's time to sound like this guy, you got to sound like that guy. There's no in between. You kind of sound like it. You've got to be that guy. You've got to be an all-in symphony player. You've got to be an all-in lead player, commercial player. And so the sound has to go with that. And as much as teachers years ago said, pick one mouthpiece and stay on it, that does not work. I don't know any players that I work with that are successful that play on one mouthpiece.
Right. And so we, at the start of the video, we kind of listed a bunch of the different work that you've played on. If you've watched some of those movies, you played some of those video games, or you're kind of like familiar with that sort of work, even in just one of those video games or one of those movies or one of those things, there's a variety of different music that is being performed there. When you go down to record that stuff, it's not like you're just sitting there and saying, oh, this is essentially a second trumpet symphony gig, right? It's that for a second, and maybe it's something else. Could you maybe give us some examples musically of kind of like when you go to a session or have something like this, and you sit down and kind of what horns do you have in front of you, and then as the music comes up, sort of the demands that you're faced with?
Sure. The first thing I'd say is pick mouthpieces and pick equipment that works with you. That makes your job easier. So work hard to make it easy.
Right.
Does that make sense? Work hard to make it easy. And so, having, a C and an E flat and piccolo and flugel and a couple B flats that gravitate towards different things so that you can relax on your equipment and changing mouthpieces, that's what you're looking for. So let's go to where most people would be, which is, okay, I have a wedding ceremony and then I got to go play a reception.
Right.
So I'm playing, I tune all my horns, they had to work with the singer and other people, and I didn't get to play my stuff. We didn't even talk over how many A sections we're playing if we're going to a B section of trumpet voluntary. You don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And that's literally how a lot of weddings, end up. And so you're playing, 20 minutes of prelude music. Let's say you're playing second movement of the Haydn. That kind of thing. You're doing some C trumpet work, and you're playing flugel, and my flugel's in the trunk.
Okay.
So, but let's say you just got done playing Jesu on flugel, and you have 15 seconds to get your piccolo ready, and you're playing, a fanfare. If I'm not sure how dialed in my chops are, and I haven't been able to play any notes, I'm probably going to opt for simplifying the fanfare, making it shorter, because I'm going to go straight into trumpet voluntary, and I don't know how many times I'm playing the A section.
That's right.
can happen, and that's the drag about playing live. You don't get a chance to fix it on a recording.
Replicating that.
Sometimes you don't get a chance to fix it on a recording if you're in a big section, and
Right.
and they're like, okay, that's the take we're taking. You're like, oh, that's great.
Right. Yeah. Thanks.
Every time somebody plays a video game, they're going to hear that plan.
Right.
Right. But let's say you gotta get packed up and try to beat the all those guests to the wedding reception, and then you're playing an hour of jazz. You know? So I might have a B flat set up with kind of my smaller classical mouthpiece, but it's still it's a bigger mouthpiece,
right?
You know, and then I'm switching to pop stuff.
Right.
You know, I'm actually I didn't play too many wedding receptions where we played things like Boogie Down, but that would be something like that.
Right.
We might play September.
Yeah.
You know, you might have something screamy that you're doing for the next 3 hours.
Right.
And then the worst case scenario is that you wake up after 4.5, 5 hours of sleep because you had to drive back from your gig, and now you've got an early morning church service.
Right.
And your chops are swollen, you know?
Right.
So then it's time to get out. You know, everybody thinks, okay, I should go to my biggest mouthpiece now. Maybe not. Maybe you should warm up. Maybe you should wake up early enough to warm up for 5 minutes, take a half an hour off, warm up another 5 minutes, take another half an hour off. Just ease your way into it and not play your biggest equipment, because if you get to your gig and you have to play something smaller, your chops have probably settled into that big equipment.
Right.
Because you were already swollen from the night before and you didn't get any sleep. So that's again where having the E flat or C or different things at your disposal, a couple of B flats, one that you can put a little bit smaller mouthpiece in, one that maybe responds better with a bigger mouthpiece. So, you know, that's another thing. When I was in college, people were like, play one mouthpiece. Well, you really can't.
Is that so? That kind of, I think, brings us to the next point here. Is you just gave us some incredible musical examples all over the map, and that can be, you know, over the course of an hour for you, or over the course of a couple of hours,
especially for recording. It's really diverse.
Right, in a very short amount of time, and that comes with its own set of challenges. Now, at what point, or is that sort of, I think it's the same question, is that sort of what drove you and what pushed you to start making your own mouthpieces specifically designed for this kind of work? Like,
it is.
Where did that start, where you actually started making your own mouthpieces?
Yeah, it's very much from, when I first started all that, I never thought I'm going to start Patrick Mouthpieces and sell mouthpieces.
Right.
That was never the idea. The idea was, this amazing guy that I get to sit next to on sessions is so much better than me. And his sound, that's what I want to sound like. It's me chasing after the sound. And I have that sound, and you have that sound in your head from listening to recordings when you grow up, whether it's commercial or jazz or orchestral or just beautiful solo sound. But the difference is that when you sit next to people that are that good, that have that kind of sound, it pulls your playing along, and it shows all the deficiencies. If you're really good, if you have good ears, it'll show you how much you're not good.
Right.
It'll show you where you're deficient, and then you should have a desire to get there. Now, a lot of that's practicing, but it's not all just practicing. I mean, we're physically made so differently that there's only a certain amount that we can overcome with practice if you're already a good player.
Right.
You know, but sonically, if you want to sound different, you need to throw in some different equipment. That's why I do play on different horns, and that's why I do switch mouthpieces. And so it was very selfishly motivated of like, how can I sound like this guy over here? How can I sound like this guy on this other end of the spectrum of commercial playing? How can I sound like him?
Right.
Because I have a great range and endurance, and I have good ears, but I don't sound like this guy. This guy's sound is this big, but it has all this sparkly goodness in all the overtone series. How do I sound like that? So mouthpiece-wise, I was chasing that. And I would say that it was 15 years into that I started thinking, hold on a second. It's not a matter of just finding a really good classical mouthpiece. It's not a matter of just finding a good high note mouthpiece. that I have endurance and range on. This is a matter of how do I find mouthpieces that I can switch back and forth with.
Okay.
And of course, conventional thought early on had told me, well, you need to keep the rim the same.
Right.
And I found that not to be true for most people.
Sure.
They overlook backbore and backbore shape and drill size and not going too wild with that and not diverse with the mouthpieces you're switching on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that's where I think Patrick Mouthpieces is much different than other mouthpiece companies is it's really grown out of how can I help myself
Right.
be able to switch and be everything to everybody that they want on a
Right.
gig.
Right.
Whether it's a church job or a recording session or a pop recording session or orchestral recording session or sitting in the symphony or whatever it is. How can I be everything to everybody? And so when I started doing the mouthpiece thing, it was like, when I started Patrick Mouthpieces, it's like, how can I help people switch?
Right.
It wasn't like, how can I help them sound the best in the practice room
Right.
on this enormous mouthpiece that they could never hope to get through a gig with? And if they got through the gig and they won a job,
Yeah.
they couldn't ever play 52 weeks a year
Right.
of gigs and orchestra because they can't make it through.
Right.
Conversely, this is a great high note mouthpiece, but the guy can't tongue on it because it's so shallow that it's just good for big band lead playing.
Right.
That's sloppy. I mean, there's a lot more to lead playing than that.
Yes.
And so figuring that out, what is the best way to keep a great sound, no matter whether it's really bright or really warm, a really good pitch center. These are the things that I've strived for with Patrick Mouthpieces, as opposed to I want the ultimate one orchestral mouthpiece or
Right.
the ultimate screamer mouthpiece.
Right.
That kind of drives me nuts. I want a screamer mouthpiece. Well, do you not want to be able to play in tune? Do you not want to be able to play
Right.
in the low register? Do you not want to be able to tongue
Yeah.
well? I mean, so yeah.
That's I think that's important to kind of direct that directly towards professional players, because what you're talking about here is we've kind of hit on this whole thing as we've had this discussion of trumpet playing used to be, you go to school, you win an orchestral job, you do that for 30, 40, 100 years, and then you die, or you do this and you do the lead player gig.
By
or
the
you
way,
do this.
that's awesome if you have
Right.
that kind of job.
Right.
That's
It's-
incredible.
And those jobs are still out there.
Yeah.
They're still,
Of course.
but I think what's important to notice about that is even within those orchestras, they're still there. Those jobs are still out there. They're playing West Side Story. They're
Yeah.
playing Bernstein. They're playing, even classically or commercially influenced or jazz influenced classical music and those kind of things. And so even within those ensembles, it's not just Bruckner. You're not just doing that. There's so much more in this, and there's so much more happening to that the professional trumpet player isn't after one mouthpiece to save the day.
Right.
They're after the tools necessary to get through the entire day, because the day is so diverse and the day is so complicated and involves so many different horns. And I think
when you were saying that, it just really reminded me of 4th of July outside with the symphony.
yes.
You're just drenched with sweat. You can't hear anything because the fireworks are going off. You're playing for fireworks, and you've already rehearsed that day inside, and you were enjoying and digging your sound because you were inside with your big equipment, and now you're outside. The mouthpiece is sliding to the wrong spot on your chops, and you're struggling for endurance. That's the perfect example of I need a different mouthpiece for that situation, even within symphony.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I don't have a position in symphony.
Right.
But I've subbed enough
Good call.
in those different things to realize that it's like, oh, this does not work to just use your biggest equipment and play C
Right.
on this whole outdoor concert.
Right.
You're
And that's
going to die.
Yeah. Right. And that's where Patrick Mouthpieces can be a lifesaver, right? In
I
those
hope so.
ways
Yeah.
of having
It has for me.
Right, exactly. Of having a couple of options where, when the rubber meets the road here, what are you going to be able to play for a long period of time and still sound good and do those kind of things? So if you're a professional player, you're probably experiencing these things, right? If you're out there kind of cutting your teeth in the wilderness of freelance trumpet playing, right?
That's a good description.
Maybe Patrick Mouthpieces, maybe Steve here can help you out a little bit. If you're interested in kind of finding out more about the company in general, you can go to patrickmouthpieces.com. If you want to learn more about Steve, there's his bio on there. If you want to kind of take a lesson from Steve, and he kind of made some comments here of, you really learn the most when you're kind of sitting next to somebody, or when you have the opportunity to really learn from somebody like that. Those were some great growth moments for you in your life. You've got a whole business now set up called Lessons with Studio Musicians, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the premise behind it. Talk a little bit, just 2 seconds about that.
For years, I've been, in town, and I haven't had the opportunity as much as I'd like to take from different teachers.
Right.
And my playing has evolved immensely during my career. I mean, I could do certain things fairly well, but they've become more and more polished and more relaxed.
Right.
And I'm able to switch around much better now than ever before. And these things probably would have come earlier if I could have taken some time off and gone and taken lessons. Well,
Right.
The whole idea with this is take from people that play in the studio, which is all genres.
Right.
And take from these guys that you don't have to leave your house.
Right.
I've got a gig Saturday. I don't have time to fly across the country and the money to take from Joe Schmo, Steve Patrick over here.
Right, yeah.
So how can I, with a reasonable amount of money, take some lessons
Right.
that I can even refer back to, and that's the Lessons with Studio Musicians. And the first series that's out right now, there's going to be more, but is just trumpet fundamentals. And I've had so many people kind of say, well, I've got that dialed in. I'd still like a different lesson. And I'm trying to tell them, this is what I do every day.
Yeah.
I do these things so that I can go do my job.
Mm-hmm.
So it really comes back to trumpet fundamentals even 30 years into a career.
Right.
And that's what I think people don't realize is that, well, they're like, well, I know how to triple tongue. Okay.
Yeah.
But have you still worked on it in such a way that it's growing, that
Right.
it's getting better?
Yeah.
You're still getting better as a player. So that's the thought process behind that.
Cool. So there's all that stuff happening, and we'll get that linked in the description for these kind of things. I'm kind of getting the feeling that like the Steve Patrick Mouthpiece Company and Lessons with Studio Musicians sort of kind of like becoming like a beacon of hope for trumpet players, right?
I hope so.
If you're looking for some equipment, we can get you taken care of there.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a little bit of advice, that's what these videos are, right? They're kind of like answering some questions. If you guys have questions specifically for Steve, leave them in the comments below. We're kind of working on these video series here, and maybe someday soon we'll do a sort of a catch-all of all the questions that we've gotten, and we'll just kind of go
That's
one right
right.
after the other of people out there, professional players, college players, the weekend warriors, the high school players, all of you guys. Leave some comments in the questions specifically for Steve, and we'll address them in the near future. Steve, thanks so much for sitting down with us again and dropping some knowledge. I think we all learned a lot here. Hopefully, if you're a pro player, you're walking away with some good stuff here. Check out all the Steve Patrick Facebook, Instagram, YouTube accounts. Like, comment, subscribe, do the whole thing. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks.